It really looks like the jungle has taken over. Guten gardening, everybody. Well, I hope you've missed us. We've been gone for 2 weeks, and if you've wondered where our videos have been, well, I'll tell you, we've actually gone on vacation. In fact, for the first time in 3 years since we started this channel, we took a vacation that lasted for a couple of weeks. So that means that I wasn't here in our garden for the last 2 weeks, and so I came back just hoping that we gotten enough rain to take care of everything here. In case you're wondering, I drove over 2,500 miles on this vacation, and I'm back and I'm actually feeling rested. I hope you can hear that rejuvenation in my voice. It was wonderful to spend time with family and to be out there, but now I have to check in on the garden, and I haven't done a close inspection yet. This is the first morning since we got back. We got back last night, and I've got to walk around and see what's here. Now, I know based on checking the weather app that we got rain at least 4 times, and the grass here isn't the crispy brown it was when I left, so it seems like we got enough rain. I also know, I mean, just from the plants behind me, the potatoes in these buckets, they were about 3 inches tall when we left, and they're at least 2 feet, and so we've got some definite development, but I've seen some weeds as well. I think we've got our work cut out for us catching back up with the garden, but let's take a look at what 2 weeks away has done here at Guten Gardening. You know, it's hard to pick a place where you should even start this tour, but I think I'm gonna start with my broccoli. Now, I've got 2 3x6 raised beds here. One is filled with garlic and the other one is filled with broccoli. And the broccoli here, when I left, there were no heads on it whatsoever. I mean, they hadn't started forming heads. 2 weeks later, and you can see the problem that we have now. Not only have they formed heads, but they've gone past that stage and they've started to sprout from there. Now, if I leave them much longer, what's going to happen is they're going to form these pretty little yellow flowers and we could get some seeds from them, but that's not what we want. We want to eat some broccoli. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut these off. Now, they're going to be delicious. They're going to taste great. They're just not going to have that nice tight shape that you would expect from broccoli. But that being said, we don't want to wait any longer with these. You don't like to have your broccoli go to waste whatsoever. You don't like to see it loosen up like this. But again, you want to take a little break from the garden, and this kind of thing can happen. Now, right next door is our garlic, and we're going to do a garlic harvest video here very soon. In fact, I'm going to probably get out here and harvest this garlic today. One of the things that Keen Garlic, which is who we're following for our directions for planting, growing, and harvesting the garlic, one of the things they said is if you take a look and you see somewhere between 4 or 5 leaves still alive, that's the time to get in here and harvest. Of course, you can always check the bulb. And so I'm seeing that on quite a few of these where the rest of the plant has died back, but I've got 4 or 5 leaves. And so we're going to show you how we harvest that here shortly. Another thing that I've noticed here, and that is that the scapes, we left 2 scapes on because we wanted to go to seed. We want to collect those seeds and have some fun with that. Those are straight up. The flowers are about to open up out of, well, I'll show you what I'm talking about here. The flowers are about to open up and we're about to be able to collect those seeds. So that tells me that that's time to harvest this garlic. Now, I'll tell you, we did a pretty good job of keeping the weeds and stuff down before we left on vacation, but there are weeds all through this patch. I mean, there are weeds throughout, I would say. So that's gonna be a big task, a big undertaking for us in the next couple of days, getting these weeds out of here. Of course, as we're harvesting the garlic, that's one thing that we wanted to try to avoid, but you know, it is what it is. Let's take a look at what's next door. Now, our plum tree this year was loaded down with plums, and it looks like they're getting to the stage where they're ripe. I'm actually gonna cut this one open and show you what it looks like here. You know, there's something about a fresh plum. The first year we planted this tree, we didn't get anything, of course, but the second year we got one ripe plum, and last year we got nothing. But this year, I see 30, 40, 50 plums on here. Take a look at that deep red color. Oh, it's so sweet. And there's so many more on here. So the first 2 beds we're looking at here are right in the back corner of our property. Right beside that, we have a couple of tomato plants. Now, I had just planted these tomatoes. It was a late planting right before we left 2 weeks ago, and they're starting to take off pretty well. Right beside that, we have some winter squash that I also planted. And now with these, you can see there's some fruit starting out on there, but I definitely need to train these up to the trellis. And now let's take a look at compost row. So these were also late plantings. This is our brand new setup, our hugelkultur type setup that we have in here. So you can see they're not actually, they've settled a little bit, but I planted in each of these compost bins. I've got eggplant in here, squash, and I tell you, everything looks nice and healthy. I can see some flowers starting to form on the squash. I've got Brussel sprouts, peppers. Everything is looking really nice and healthy in here. And that's one of the reasons why we always grow in the top of our compost bins. We don't compost all that hot. The top doesn't seem to get all that hot anyway. And so this works out really nicely as an additional bit of garden square footage. Now, directly across from compost row, we have our biggest bed of potatoes. Well, actually, it's probably about the same size as our long bed. This is a 6x6 keyhole bed. So this is 30 square feet, about what we have here, of potatoes growing. And again, when I left, you could still see the soil all around it. Now, I have given it a nice feeding of bone meal early on. Once it starts to flower, and I'm already seeing some flowers starting to appear on these potatoes, we're going to give it another feeding here, but these are looking really nice, lush, and healthy. And remember, we removed the nectarine tree that was shading out a large part of this bed, and so they're getting a lot more sun here than they did last season. So we hope that that means some better production than we had last year, because it was really quite unsuccessful last time around. Hey, by the way, we have a gray cat that has started coming around our property. He's not disturbing any of the vegetables or anything like that. Actually, I see him kind of hunting right now. And what I hope he's doing is hunting those voles that have been so pesky for us. Because if he's doing that, then he's welcome on our property any day. I'll even pet him a little bit. All right, I'm going to try to acclimate you as best I can so you really get a feel for what I'm talking about here in terms of our location. So you can see the beds that I've been looking at so far, and now we're going to turn it around to our patio, which is right across from those beds, still at the back of our house, and you're going to see our green stalk potatoes and our vertical potatoes. Now, the first year that we grew potatoes in our green stalk vertical garden, we did a really nice job with a red, white, and blue harvest. I absolutely loved that harvest. Last season did not work out well for us. This year, everything is looking super nice and healthy, although the soil here, the mix is a little bit dry. Again, we haven't been here to water for 2 weeks. So the fact that it still looks nice and that almost everything, I mean, there's a couple little spots here on a couple of the potato plants here that have died back, but just about everything else looks so nice and lush and green. So one thing I definitely need to do in addition to pulling the weeds, and there aren't any weeds in the green stalk, so that's a really nice feature. But what I need to do is to get in here and get these watered. And since some of these stems are getting really nice and big, we're going to use our support method, the system that we created last season, to go ahead and support the heavier ones of these stems so that they don't fall over. Now, directly beside that, we have two other green stalks back here. One of them, I planted some bush bean green beans, and when I left 2 weeks ago, they were about 5 inches tall, and they hadn't yet started producing any of the beans. I'm going to show you what those look like right now, because you can see lots of flowers that are just about to form, and I guarantee you if I get out here and water these nicely, these are just going to take off and finish the rest of the formation of the beans, and we're going to be harvesting these within a little over a week. That would be my guess, because the flowers are ready and these beans grow so quickly. Now, we don't have the automatic watering system on these. If you didn't see our video where we did the setup for the green stalk watering system, that is a phenomenal system. It can make a huge difference if you wanted to go away like we did for a couple of weeks. But again, we don't have them set up on these yet, and that's why what you're gonna see next has happened. Now, directly behind me is a green stalk filled with spinach. So we transplanted that spinach from our keyhole bed where we wanted to plant our potatoes. And at the time, the spinach didn't look all that great because it had received too much sun, too much heat. It was kind of burning a little bit. So we planted it over in our green stalk, and I'm going to show you some footage from before I left so you can see that it was nice and lush and green, although a couple of them, because it was a little bit older, it was starting to go to seed. Well, since we left, you can see what's happened. This has died back. You can see a little bit toward the center where it's going to seed, but this part we're going to just go ahead and start over at this point. Unless we want to collect some of these spinach seeds, we're going to go ahead and start over and replant this with something else. We have to make that decision still as to what that's going to be. And actually there are a few green leaves left on there that we can harvest, not very much, but we're going to still harvest those. Now right beside me here is our modified roost out vertical garden. We grew in for the first time last year. We have potatoes at the top and we have sweet potatoes growing down below. Now last season was our first attempt at this. The hay wasn't all that broken down. It hadn't fully decomposed. And we think that this season things should go better. We think we should get better results. Well, our potatoes are looking fantastic up top. Our sweet potatoes definitely need some attention. You can see there are a couple of sweet potato slips that didn't make it. They weren't all as established as I would have liked to have had them before I left. You know, unless they're well established, you don't necessarily know that they're going to take off and you can replace them. But it's been a couple weeks. It's kind of late in the season now for me to try to replace them. That being said, quite a few of them are still looking quite nice. And I'll also say that we planted quite a few of our sweet potatoes as usual in our black containers, and those look to be doing just about the best of any of our sweet potatoes. Although there are some weeds that I have to take care of, they're looking like they're developing quite nicely. And so we're going to take out those weeds. We're going to make sure they don't have any additional competition as they're trying to grow us some really nice sweet potatoes. There, that looks a lot better. Now, I only pulled a couple weeds just now, but that felt so good to get those out of the sweet potatoes. Again, that's just the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, really, for what we have to do. Now, directly behind me, we have our potato experiment where we're doing our flowers versus no flowers potatoes. So we picked the flowers off 2 of the 4 of the 50-gallon half-cut blue containers of potatoes here. And we're going to see the results. These are our mega chips. I think these are going to be the first potatoes we harvest. They haven't died back yet. They're looking super strong and healthy. I have high hopes for this harvest for sure. You can see right now, it does look like a jungle. You can see they've started to fall over a little bit under their own weight, but it won't be too long before that potato harvest comes to life. All right, from those potatoes, we're going to go to the back garden, our main garden space here. And it's truly the space that looks the most like a jungle, primarily because of the volunteer tomatoes we have sprouting up everywhere back here. I'm going to start with our onions, which is behind our garden, and I'm going to move from there up into our main garden, and we're going to see how things look. Now, I said onions is where we're going to start, but actually I'm going to start with the leeks that are right down here. And you can see they look nice, but again, all of these weeds have just really sprung up around them, which is making it harder for them. They're really competing. And that's even more so the case for our onions themselves. They're really in competition, but it's not just with the weeds that are here, because there are plenty of those, but these plants, these volunteer tomatoes, were tiny when I left, and I had no time, unfortunately, to take them out. And so you can see some of our onions are suffering. And where we have the onions that don't have that competition, they're bulbing up really nicely. So that's something I have to deal with right away, get these cleared out so that I don't have this problem. We really want our onions. It's an important part of our harvest. You know, one thing that's going to be really important here in trying to catch up is prioritizing a schedule for what needs to happen first. Those onions are going to be right at the top of the list for what we need to clear out. But take a look at this space in our main bed. It is just filled with weeds, and you can see the eggplants and other plants trying to make their way through the top. But this was all cleared out when I left here 2 weeks ago. So it's very understandable when people say, I was on top of the garden, then all of a sudden I took a day off, or I left for a minute, and it's like the weeds sprang up overnight. Well, it's true. They can overtake a garden so quickly. So staying on top of them is important. Well, we didn't have that luxury on this vacation. You know what? I don't mind putting in the work because it was a great trip. But I'm definitely going to be packed with a lot of work now. Now you have to look kind of closely down here, but you should be able to see some of our cucumber plants and then a whole bunch of tomatoes. And these are actually intentionally transplanted tomatoes. These are volunteers, but we took them from places in the garden and we transplanted them directly. We just need to thin those out. We got a couple of pole beans that made it from our time of planting while we were gone, although there is a couple of spots that I'm seeing where it looks like something got in here and ate them off. Hopefully not any rabbits, although we've tried to protect our garden from those rabbits, although I'm seeing some damage to a few of our other plants in here. Well, there you see one of my favorite flowers in the garden. That's our onion flower. Our brassicas in here, these are all Brussels sprouts. Look like something's been eating them. In a couple of spots, it looks like it's not just a regular pest. It looks like it could be some kind of rabbit or something getting in here because of the way it's eating it down. But I think they'll still perform okay. And here's the end of our bed that is just quail waste. That's what we have all these plants growing in. And first of all, there are so many volunteer tomatoes around the outside. It's insane. But inside, our summer squash is growing beautifully. Take a look at some of these that I'm harvesting right now. So we've got some nice production growing in this quail waste. We've talked about it before, but that's one of the reasons why we're raising quail, to be able to use their waste in the garden. Even though it takes some time to compost, this stuff is going to be fantastic for our bed, and you can see some of the results already. One of the things that definitely happens with summer squash, if you don't stay on top of them, they get massive, and some people really don't like the taste of the bigger summer squash. Let us know what you think about that. We definitely have a couple in here. Well, let me show you the one that's really big. I'll tell you right now, we're going to be making oodles and oodles of zoodles. Now we're at the back side of my house where we have the heritage red raspberries. This is such a sweet berry. Very little seed to it. You don't taste the seed. When I left, these weren't ripe at all. And now some of them have gone to waste because they're overripe. But I have to get out and pick these right away so we can get as many of these in as possible. Now, the nice thing about these heritage red raspberries is we'll get a second harvest later in the season. That's a really awesome aspect of our fall bearing raspberries. That's why we have a different or a variety of berries out here so we can get harvests at different times. And of course, I'm going to show you my favorite tasting raspberry out here. That is the golden raspberry. This is so delicious. These tend to actually be a little bit bigger than our other raspberries as well. And on top of that, there are no thorns on the raspberry plant. I would say the majority of these are going to ripen up over the next couple of days. So we can harvest some of them, but we still got some more time on these. All right, we're going to come up from our main garden space now around the side of our house. This is an area that gets about 7 or 8 hours of sunlight each day, depending on how close it is to the front of our house. But here we have our root stout bed, the potatoes, and we have 4 or 5 different varieties in here, 3 main varieties, Charlotte, Yellowfin, and Yukon Gold growing in here. And then we have some miscellaneous potatoes at the end. And then right down from that, we have our long 32-foot bed. And here we have sweet potatoes and potatoes. And it looks to me like the sweet potatoes need a little bit of help. They're not as far along as we'd like them to be, but our potatoes are looking great. We have some of them that are already at the stage of flowering as well. And so we'll see how these beds perform. This is the first year we've split them half and half with sweet potatoes and potatoes. In the past, we've either gone all sweet potatoes or all potatoes. Well, I'm getting close to ending this tour. I have so much work to do out here after a couple of weeks that I can't take too much time on this, but I do want to show you some of our berries here. Our pink champagne currants and our gooseberries right there. Our grape plants are loaded down. I'm going to zoom out so you can see just how lush and just fantastic these grape plants look. The vines are fabulous. And then I'm going to come in here really nice and close and show you all the grapes we have on here. They're all still green. We still got some time before they ripen up, but there's so many on here. I'm just predicting some grape juice in our future. We made grape juice for the first time last year. It was phenomenal. We want to keep that process flowing. Well, I'm going to end this video standing in the shade of the grapevines. I could show you our front yard. There's container garden on our patio. There's so much more I could show you, but again, I'm out of time for this video. And you can see the amount of work that gardening takes. And certainly there's some forethought in terms of the next time we take a vacation and go away as to ways we can improve what happens when we come back. And that's certainly on me. So that's something we'll be working toward. We have a ton out here that's going to be ripening up that we're going to be able to harvest in the next couple of months. So stay tuned. We got a lot more great content coming your way. We hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you did, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe. And most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.